Donald Trump also saying you can't make any deals without compromises. So that's just a flavour of what's being discussed inside in the Oval Office, that meeting between the two men. Once they have finished taking questions from reporters, they will of course get down to the substantive part of this meeting, that crucial bilateral meeting, and they will have lunch together, and then afterwards they will have a press conference where they will take more questions from reporters. As we know, this president makes himself very available to members of the media, and that is how often we have received much of what the policy is, the positions are from President Trump and indeed from his team. So we can now go to Michael Biokirk. He is a global affairs analyst and senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and a former spokesman for the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission in Ukraine. Michael, we just have snatches of what's being said between the two leaders in the Oval Office at the moment, but in your view, just how high stakes is this meeting today?
Good to be with you. Well, extremely high stakes. I mean, I would go so far as to say Mr. Zelensky's future as president, as a political leader of Ukraine, is at stake, because I cannot. It's hard for me to put into words the anxiety here in Ukraine of what he might or might not come back with. But the big fear, of course, is that he will come back with no or very diluted security guarantees from the United States. And to put that into real life perspective for you, we just had at least 2 Russian ballistic missiles headed this way, and there were drones elsewhere in Ukraine. And there are emergency power outages just announced in Kiev and elsewhere. So when Mr. Trump speaks of Mr. Putin as a man of peace, it certainly isn't reflected here on the ground. So everyone is looking at this, and of course, also the payback for the United States, because the feeling here, and I can totally understand it, is that we're here fighting the Russians. The Ukrainian people are saying to defend their own country, but they're also fighting Mr. Putin to keep him from going further into Europe.
Do you think, Michael, then, given what you've said there, a big part of what President Zelensky is trying to do here is remind President Trump that Ukraine is an active war zone, that there are missiles flying, as you're describing there, and this isn't about a business deal, it isn't just about money, it's about people's lives. We've already seen him hand President Trump a couple of folders of images. We didn't see the images, of course, but President Zelensky telling President Trump that this is what war looks like, this is the human cost of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Although I do wonder whether this sinks in with Mr. Trump. We've seen his reaction to what he wants to do with Gaza, for instance. By the way, I did see those images, and there is a small little diplomatic subtlety in there, if I can. On the left-hand side, Mr. Yermak, the chief of staff of Mr. Zelensky, a very powerful figure in the administration, is sitting there. It's the first time I've seen him in a suit, whereas Mr. Zelensky is in green olive. And the last person to do that, wear a suit, was the Foreign Affairs Minister, Mr. Kuleba, and he was shortly thereafter fired. I'm not saying that's happening this time, but it's one of those subtleties. But yeah, going to your question there, it boggles the mind that these types of talks are taking place. And don't forget, yesterday in Istanbul, Russian and American teams met to work out the technicalities of what was discussed in Saudi Arabia. And when I was with the OSCE here in Ukraine, we always talked about confidence-building measures. That doesn't seem to be happening right now by Russia ceasing their fire of drones and rockets.
And on this deal about minerals and resources, we heard President Trump say in the Oval Office, from what our colleagues are telling us, they keep asking about security, he said, but I said, let's make a deal first. Is there an element here from Ukraine that President Zelensky is playing a long game here, is playing a strategic game, do this deal, which is about the future monetization of resources, to kind of give President Trump something that he wants, and then to be able to move on to the next phase about actually getting an end to the fighting?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty realistic thesis. I think Mr. Zelensky is at the point where he has to stay on good terms with Mr. Trump. We saw what dividends that paid with Mr. Starmer and Mr. Macron earlier this week. So I think in a way it's deliberately vaguely worded. and almost a gift to Mr. Trump that he can take this, go back to his base, his MAGA base or wherever, and say, see, we have the best deal on earth. No one else could have done it. And then maybe go a little bit silent and let the dust settle. At the same time, Mr. Zelensky will go back and say, this is just a framework agreement. I think James Waterhouse compared it almost to a trade agreement, and saying that, discussions are going to be taking place. But having said that, of course, what does that bring immediately to the Ukrainian people? Not much hope, because, as I indicated, the bombs and drones are still coming down. And just quickly, Katrina, if I may, I mean, the other aspect here, of course, is a lot of Ukrainians are very familiar with what's beneath the ground, what's over the ground. And a lot of these rare earth minerals that are being talked about are not accessible. I think something like 40% are embedded in the occupied territories. So the payback for this, for either side, will be very, very long. Payback so long that it would probably not come until way after Mr. Trump is out of office. So that's an interesting element here, of course, too.
But if President Zelensky leaves without the security guarantee that he's looking for, how will that be received back in Ukraine?
Not well, because I can tell you from being here for most of the past 3 years, is people are tired, they're fatigued. In fact, I just talked to the deputy mayor of Lviv in Western Ukraine, and he said we're taking a very big hit from aspects of martial law, but also the government in Kiev taking a big part of their revenues to fund the war, which is, of course, understandable. But he also told me, we need our airport opened because we depend so much on it, and so do other Ukrainian cities. So that's why, we're reaching that, I don't want to call it a breaking point, but getting close to where it's going to be difficult to see the Ukrainian economy carry on. So, but I think for now, Ukrainians they're very great fighters. They're hopeful people. They're also looking at their European neighbors and saying perhaps they can backstop the United States. But Katrina, when you take away things like satellite intelligence and you take away the Patriot missile system, which an angry Mr. Trump could do, we can't rule that out, it leaves the country very, very exposed and puts it in a very dangerous phase.
Okay. Michael, thank you very much for joining us with those insights. Great to have you with us here on BBC News, and we will talk to you again, I'm sure, as these matters proceed.